All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are tackling a transformation that, let's be honest, pretty much all of us desperately need right now. We live in this crazy era of constant pings, Slack notifications going off, overflowing inboxes, endless meetings. It can literally feel like our attention is being pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. So we're going to unpack the process of deep work. We want to turn it from just this abstract, nice-sounding idea into a really practical, step-by-step playbook that you can use right away to turn your distracted, totally exhausted workdays into periods of elite-level focus. Okay, let's dive into this.
So, does this sound familiar at all? You feel busy all day long, yet completely unproductive. You spend 8, actually maybe even 10 hours racing around, furiously typing replies, jumping from Zoom call to Zoom call. But then you log off, you look back at what you actually accomplished, and there's nothing of real substance there, right? This is the central problem of the modern knowledge worker. We are constantly exhausted, basically running on the absolute fumes of fragmented attention, but we're lacking meaningful needle-moving output. We've totally confused motion with progress.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, the distraction epidemic. Then, the deep work superpower. After that, choosing your depth philosophy, building your deep rituals, embracing boredom to focus, and finally, draining the shallows.
All right, kicking things off with part 1, the distraction epidemic, the metric black hole.
60%. That is a staggering number. But that is exactly how much of their work week the average knowledge worker spends just engaged in electronic communication and internet searching, according to a major 2012 McKinsey study. Just think about that for a second. More than half the week is totally gone before any actual heavy lifting even begins. In fact, nearly 30% of our workers' time is dedicated purely to reading and answering email. In the modern workplace, we've essentially become human network routers, prioritizing visible busyness over actual value creation. And this happens because the real cost of all this distraction falls into what's called a metric black hole, because it's incredibly hard to measure the bottom line financial impact of a fragmented, distracted hour versus a highly focused hour. We just kind of pretend the cost doesn't exist at all.
Moving on to part 2, the deep work superpower, and how to actually thrive in the new economy. Because here's the wild thing, while the entire working world is getting more and more distracted, just constantly yielding to the ping of the inbox, the economic value of intense focus is skyrocketing. Those rare people who can truly focus are becoming disproportionately valuable. And our guide for mastering this is Cal Newport's groundbreaking text, Deep Work: Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. We're going to use Newport's insights as the absolute foundation for our step-by-step guide to reclaiming our cognitive limits, really mastering the process of deep work, and utterly outperforming the distracted masses. To really understand this superpower, we have to contrast it with what we normally do all day. So on one side, we have deep work. These are professional activities performed in a state of totally distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their absolute limit. These efforts create brand new value, they rapidly improve your skill, and, this is key, they are incredibly hard for anyone else to replicate. On the other side, we have shallow work. These are the non-cognitively demanding logistical-style tasks, which are almost always performed while you're distracted by something else. We're talking moving data around, answering routine emails, sitting in status meetings. These tasks are super easy to replicate, and ultimately, they just don't create much new value in the world.
Deep work is so important that business writer Eric Barker literally calls it the superpower of the 21st century. Just consider the incredible story of Jason Ben. He was a financial consultant who came to this stark, kind of scary realization that his job could essentially be automated by a simple Excel macro. He actually admitted to spending up to 98% of his days surfing the web, just pretending to work. So he made a radical choice. He quit. He decided he was going to learn coding, but he knew he couldn't do it while distracted. So he literally locked himself in a room with absolutely no computer. None. Just textbooks, note cards, and a highlighter. By mastering this superpower of intense focus and engaging deeply with the material on paper, he rapidly learned a very hard skill. He ended up graduating top of his class at a grueling coding bootcamp and landed a developer job that more than doubled his previous salary to over $100,000. It's a real game changer.
Which brings us to part 3, choosing your depth philosophy, finding your fit. Look, willpower alone isn't going to be enough to force yourself into the process of deep work. You can't just tell yourself to try harder. It doesn't work. You must deliberately select a specific scheduling philosophy to integrate this focus into your life.
The first approach is the monastic philosophy. This is all about extreme isolation. Think of the famous computer scientist Donald Knuth, who isolates himself to think big thoughts and completely rejects standard email culture. The guy doesn't even have an email address. If your primary professional value comes from doing one cognitively demanding thing exceptionally well, like writing a book or proving a massive theorem, this highly protective path might actually be for you. But if extreme isolation isn't totally realistic for your career, you might want to consider the bimodal philosophy. This was famously used by the pioneering psychiatrist Carl Jung. Jung literally built a rustic, primitive stone tower in Bollingen, way out in the woods, far away from his busy clinical practice and the bustling coffeehouses of Zurich. He'd retreat to this tower for multi-day stretches of intense monastic-style focus to write and think, and then he would return to his regular, highly social city life. You're essentially dividing your time into distinct, deep modes where you are completely unreachable and open modes where you are available for all the standard shallow work. Now, for the standard office worker who's really trying to implement the process of deep work, the rhythmic philosophy is incredibly popular. This is about transforming deep work into a regular, reliable habit to completely remove the immense mental friction of deciding when to focus. You might use comedian Jerry Seinfeld's famous chain method, putting a giant red X on the calendar every single day you do the work, building this visual chain you just don't want to break. Or you simply set a rigid daily time like 5 to 7:30 a.m. every morning before the house wakes up. The time is set, so you just show up and execute, no thinking required. The most advanced approach is the journalistic philosophy. Journalist and author Walter Isaacson used this method to write his epic 800-page biographies. He developed the crazy ability to rapidly switch his mind into intense writing mode on a moment's notice. He could squeeze deep work into a 30-minute free stretch between meetings or while just waiting for a flight at the airport. Now, this requires a tremendous amount of confidence in your abilities and a lot of practice, because the human brain usually really struggles to shift context that quickly without leaving some lingering attention residue behind. All right, part 4, building your deep rituals, structuring the focus. So great minds absolutely do not wait for inspiration to strike. They build strict, highly idiosyncratic rituals to minimize the friction of starting. To build your own deep work ritual, you need to answer 3 mandatory questions in advance. First, where and for how long? Define a specific location, maybe a quiet conference room or a local library, and set a specific, totally non-negotiable time frame. Second, how will you work? Establish strict rules for the session. This could be a total ban on the internet, leaving your phone in another room, or maybe tracking a specific metric like words produced per interval to keep yourself honest. And third, how will you support your work? Your brain needs fuel. Are you going to start with a specific cup of premium coffee? Will you take a quick walking break to clear your head? Systemize the whole shebang so you aren't wasting precious mental energy figuring it out in the heat of the moment. Part 5, embracing boredom to focus. Training the brain. Look, concentration is an actual mental muscle. If you don't train it, and if you constantly seek out novel stimuli online at the absolute slightest hint of boredom, like, reaching for your phone the second you get in line at the grocery store, your deep work habit will inevitably fail. To train that muscle, try Roosevelt Dashes. This strategy asks you to identify a deep task, estimate how long you'd normally put aside for it, and then give yourself a hard artificial deadline that drastically reduces that time. Maybe you literally cut it in half. It forces an extreme intensity of focus and completely eliminates the possibility of giving into distraction because you simply don't have the time. It is exactly like high-intensity interval training, but for the attention centers of your brain. Another really excellent brain training exercise in the process of deep work is called productive meditation. This is where you use a period of physical activity, like walking the dog, jogging, or commuting, to focus exclusively on a single, well-defined professional problem. You do this in 3 structured steps. First, you review the relevant variables of the problem you're facing. Next, you define the specific next step question you need to answer to actually make progress. And finally, you mentally consolidate your gains once you have an answer. But here's the catch. Whenever your mind inevitably wanders to random thoughts or anxieties, and it will, you must practice bringing it firmly back to the problem at hand, just like returning to your breath in mindfulness meditation. Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, Draining the Shallows, Reclaiming Your Time. You absolutely must be ruthless about identifying and calling shallow work to make space for depth. Why? Because research shows that the human cognitive capacity for deep work maxes out at around 4 hours a day, even for experts. You simply cannot do it for 8 hours straight. The first step to reclaiming that precious time is to schedule every single minute of your day. We spend so much of our waking lives on autopilot, just reacting to whatever lands in our inbox. By time blocking your schedule in advance, literally giving every minute a job, you force yourself to actively decide what is deep and what is shallow, rather than letting other people's emergencies dictate your entire life.
But how do you actually know what is shallow? Well, use this fantastic mental heuristic. Ask yourself, if I hired a smart, recent college graduate, how long would it take to train them to do this specific task? If it would only take them a few hours or maybe a few days to learn how to do it, it is easily replicable, shallow work. But if it requires months or years of training because it relies on your hard-won expertise and unique insights, it leverages your true value. That makes it critical, deep work.
I want to end with a bit of a provocative challenge directly to you today. Ask yourself, or hey, even bring this up in your next one-on-one with your boss. What is your shallow work budget? What exact percentage of your time will you allow for shallow, logistical work going forward? Is it 20%, 30%? Define that specific number, stick to it absolutely ruthlessly, and completely rebuild your schedule around the rest. By intentionally culling the shallow, you make immense room for the deep work that will truly transform your career. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope you leave here inspired to completely reinvent your daily routine and cultivate your own superpower of the 21st century.